Don't shoot. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. What do we want?
On the topic of being an ally, how should we define the difference between being actively anti-racist and just not racist?
So this is a big conversation that I think started towards the beginning of this version of the Black Lives Matter movement, that I've been actively really trying to talk about and communicate with a lot of people in my personal circle. So it's great to not be racist, but that's the bare minimum, right? So that's the bare minimum of humanity, is of like, cool, you're not racist, now what? And so anti-racism is actively working against racism. And so what that means is like it starts with having those, I know that Sam, you kind of mentioned this earlier, it starts with having those interpersonal conversations. It starts with combating it at home and with your friends, and kind of taking those microaggressions that like you were speaking on, Jabari, about how like your friends might make those jokes and stuff. It should be somebody else in that group who isn't a Black person who's standing up and saying, why are you guys making that joke? Like, that doesn't need to be happening. So anti-racism, I think, begins with openly speaking out against it and working against racism within your own circle, within your own family, within your own friend group. Because as we said, I mean, we can march all we want, but if we can't have those conversations at home, that's going to be a big issue, because then you're not dealing with kind of the roots of all of it. You're only kind of dealing with the surface issue stuff that we're seeing, the bigger stuff and the bigger picture, when kind of like you were saying before, Sam, it's very micro. You have to get micro with it if you're going to talk about the macro. Being not racist allows for a lot of denial, I would argue. So denial of white privilege, denial of those different microaggressions that a lot of times people somewhat unconsciously contribute to, versus anti-racism, like you're going to work on educating yourself instead of relying on people of color, specifically Black people in this case, to educate you about those issues. And you're also going to work on it being intersectional, because as we said before, Black Lives Matter, but also we then had to create that subcategory of Black Trans Lives Matter, because it wasn't getting the point across. We got to be specific. So I think a lot of it starts with being able to talk about it in your own circle and then working towards educating yourself.
I also think it has a lot to do with what we surround ourselves with. So something I've been seeing online from companies and just people that I follow on the internet who are now learning what it means to be anti-racist, actively anti-racist. And some of the ideas that they're going on is like, look at your CEOs, look at your board of trustees. Like, what do they look like? Do you have a diverse group of opinions giving you, advice? Like, what toys are we giving our kids? Are we only buying them the white Barbies? Are we buying them Barbies of all color? Stuffed animals, toys, books, movies. Like, it has to be taught to the youth, because that's how it's going to turn into adults. We have to actively reverse what has been taught for so many years. And that's where it gets like deep rooted. Like, muscle doesn't grow without it hurting. So we need to hurt just a little bit. We need to look at the hard things. We need to have those hard discussions. And we need to be anti-racist, because again, anyone can be not racist, but you have to actively be fighting for diversity in your life. Otherwise, you're going to go back to having those microaggressions, having those thoughts of the diet racism, things like that. You have to, there's a book, How to Be Anti-Racist, and one of the big quotes from it is, to undo racism, you have to constantly be seeking it and constantly wanting to dismantle it. You have to constantly be looking for it. You can't just happen upon it. You have to see, who do I follow on Instagram? Who do I have, like, what YouTube creators do I watch? There's a tattoo studio here in Nashville that I've always gone to since I moved here, but they posted something the other day that I had never even thought of. Because I have fairly light skin, I don't have to worry about tattoos and how art is going to look on my body, because color is color and the ink is going to run the color it's supposed to on my skin tone. But they posted a status the other day saying that they realized that they don't have people of color on their Instagram feed. And while they tattoo people of color, they've just never shared that. And it's their fault that someone could be scrolling and think, I would like to get a tattoo, something as simple as that, but I don't know what it's going to look like. And I don't have an opportunity to see what that looks like on people who look like me. And that's something that I'm noticing is like, that's a privilege that I have, is I've never had to worry about that. And now being actively anti-racist is I'm scrolling through feeds saying like, oh, how many people of any type of color did they have on here? Who are they advertising to? Whether that's wedding planners, photographers, tattoo studios. Like you need to work actively on diversifying what you look at so that you can normalize diversity itself.
How do biracial folks figure into the equation? Are you black enough to feel our pain?
I am biracial. My father is black, my mother is white. I never realized this as a child. It took up until I think I was a teenager to realize that I didn't really know where I fit in, because I grew up in the Syracuse City School District, which is a very diverse district, people of all color, all walks. I was surrounded by everything I could have ever seen. And then when I was going to middle school, I moved to a different district, a very non-diverse district. And my parents, to no fault, did not actively try to make me embrace any type of culture in my life after that move. And I think that's where the first mistake was, because then I was surrounded by all of these, like I was the black friend. As light skinned as I was the black friend. I was that person. My friends would lovingly call me like an Oreo, and I never knew what that meant. Like I knew what that meant, but I didn't think it was insulting at the time. I thought like, oh, it's America's favorite cookie. Okay. And just really minor things like that definitely took a toll on me, being around people where, you know, everyone had really light skin and straight hair and like all the bodies looked the same. And that kind of not helped me, but I developed like body issues and identity issues by being around that and not having people that looked like half of my heritage. And I don't know, it took a long time to realize that that wasn't right, that I needed to be around both sides of my culture. And with people who are biracial, I think one of the biggest struggles is, or even not biracial, people who have lighter skin, who are considered white passing, like we have to wake up every day and try and be ourselves, when a lot of the people in America think we can wake up and choose what race we want to be that day. And that's something that I've struggled with between applying to jobs, applying to colleges when I was younger, is like, what box do I check? You know, if there isn't a biracial box, or if there isn't an option to pick more than one, which one do I pick? And there are people out there that will pick black because they want to have a leg up. And then there are people that will pick white because they want a leg up. And that was a struggle for me, like, especially on tests as well, because there's a bubble and you can only pick one and there's no other. Like, what does that mean for us? A lot of America is biracial. A lot of America is diverse. That's kind of what America is. And it kind of stinks that it took me growing up and so many others growing up and having to deal with all of those problems, but not realizing how detrimental they were to us growing up.
So I'll jump in. Also biracial. My father is black, my mother is white. So there's a lot of struggle. So I'm not at all discounting anything you just said, Kieran, because I experienced a lot of that too. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. But for us, there's also a lot of privilege. So with the question, like, are we black enough to feel our pain? Only for part of it, I would argue personally. We're black enough in the sense that we are black and we are in this movement as a person, like we have personal skin in the game. But also, I'm never going to understand what it's like for a darker skinned black person in this country, because I don't experience that. That doesn't mean that I can't then empathize and fight for it. And so that's where I think we have to kind of move out of the biracial narrative of like dealing with all of our identity issues and kind of move into, okay, yeah, that's true, but also we can't, most of us can do white, a lot of us can pass as white, and that's a huge, huge privilege. A lot of us don't experience the same level of overt racism that darker skinned black people in this country get. And so I think like colorism, to kind of explain it to anybody who might be watching that doesn't fully understand it, it's the direct discrimination against darker skinned black people and other people of color. And I think that the biggest issue in the colorism game right now is that the champions of colorism are largely darker skinned black women, and that needs to change. There has to be solidarity throughout all of the shades of black people as far as that goes, because there's just certain things that lighter skinned black people will never experience and will never have to endure that darker skinned black people will. And so I think it's I think it's less of a question of are you Black enough to feel our pain, but more of a question like we're Black, but also we need to empathize and understand. Again, it's getting specific. It's understanding that we don't all experience the same things within this space, even though we occupy it, because we all occupy it differently. It's important to be able to empathize where people who are saying those things like, you're not Black enough or you're not whatever, XYZ. I used to meet it with a lot of aggression and be really offended. But now in growing and learning and reading a lot more and understanding these things like colorism, I just empathize and I'm like, you know what, that if that's how you feel, that's valid, period. Because it doesn't come from a place of, excuse me, disdain or hatred for biracial people. It comes from a place of disdain and hurt and pain from what they experience as a darker skinned person. It's just something that has to be like the colorism movement has to start including more biracial people, more lighter skinned people, because we're the people that are actively perpetuating these things. We're allowing this to happen, and we have to recognize that if we're going to change it. Because a lot of brands, kind of like we were talking about with the anti-racism, a lot of brands think that they can get away with just, we have a Black person, they're biracial, like it's cool, they have like fun hair, whatever. And that's not okay. Like you need all colors on that spectrum. You can't just pick someone who could arguably be white passing or is like a light caramel complexion and be like, well, that's a Black person, so aren't we diverse enough? No, it's not. And that's why, like, kind of to mention specific brands, Fenty Beauty, that's led by Rihanna, has done a phenomenal job because they make it a priority. I know she just released a nude line of lipsticks, and it was really important. And a lot of Black content creators on YouTube were like, this is important because up until now, the nude color has been for white people or biracial people that are white passing. It does not include the deepest shades of Black. And that's so, so important to be in this conversation.
Yeah, I love that you touched on Fenty specifically, because that was the first brand that I saw. And I know that there were others before her, but they weren't as prevalent in my life. But as someone who wears makeup, Fenty was the first brand where even I could find something that fit my oddly particular color, like shade of skin, and also women significantly darker than me. It was a very inclusive line. And I think, and I hope that more makeup brands moving forward take that platform and take that initiative and make, 60 shades of makeup, because there's not just 5. And they make a whole line of what nude means, because growing up, I took dance classes and I would have to wear tights. And nude tights to me was the color sun, and it was orange. And that's not nude, but that was nude for me. And those are just minor things that as a brand, we need brands that when you make something that's nude colored, you don't make 3 of it. You don't make 4 of it, 5 of it. There's so many shades of people out there, between different shades of light skin, different shades of dark skin. And it doesn't, like, you just need to put the effort in to make sure that everyone is represented. And it's not that hard of an effort. And it just does such good to society when you do that. You make people feel like they fit in and not that they're the weird ones.
I was gonna kind of mention, we all, went through the OCC, it's now broadcast media program, but, media plays a big role in that as well. If you look, those who are lighter skin are, in a sense, lifted up more than those with darker skin. And, there seems to be, a sense of resentment, in the Black community. Like, wait, well, my Black is beautiful. Like you guys said, there's different shades of Black. But, in order to, pass or make, I guess, crossover or make white America feel comfortable about, what is being displayed in certain forms of media, whether it's advertisement, movies, TV, radio, whatever it is. We have to have the lighter skin, long hair or whatever type of person. And now you're seeing, kind of Black Americans kind of change that narrative for themselves. You mentioned Rihanna, they're changing the narrative for themselves. Like, no, this is beautiful as well. Dark skin, kinky hair, however you want it, this is beautiful as well. And I think once we start to put that out there and, make that normal, whatever normal is, people, whether they like it or not, can start to recognize that. So.
And even with, like, kind of as you were mentioning specifically hair, even the natural hair movement was led by light-skinned women particularly, who, and it's not servicing, like a lot of these products, a lot of these brands, it's not servicing an entire group of people. And so it's really interesting, because I know that that's something that's very prevalent in my life. It's something that I follow because I struggled a lot with that specific part of my identity with my hair growing up. And constantly wanting to like chemically straighten it, change it, like figure out a way to look more like the people around me, because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. And now with the natural hair movement, I feel represented because most of the people who are participating in it have hair like me. It's not like, you're not getting the 4C textures, right? You're not getting those really kinky, curly textures. So one of the better parts I think that's been slowly happening is more involvement of those other diverse voices in that specific part of the movement. But yeah, it's what you're saying, that the diversity and the representation has to be there, period.
I want to jump on, I know we're talking about things that are on the tail end, but I want to jump on a couple of things that that happened in the beginning. And I've got a lot of different Caucasian friends and Caucasian people who are part of my family. And the conversation that I continually have with them is that I love interracial relationships, even when you're dealing with all different races. But I'm quick to remind them that when you want to be with an African American person, you should understand that the child that you two are going to have will possibly have darker skin, right? And to understand that that's a choice that you're making as a Caucasian male, as a Caucasian female. And if you make that choice to be with somebody of a different race, if you make that choice to be with an African American person, you should also have the responsibility and be responsible enough to say, okay, now I love this person for who they are, but if I love this person, I love them enough to have a child, I'm going to want to be involved and to know as much as I can about Black history, so that I can be a parent who understands that I'm parenting a child who has darker skin and what that means to them. And though I may not, you know what I mean, may not be able to lead that conversation because I haven't had those experiences, I can support that conversation and I can help them grow up with a full experience as a Caucasian and African American child, so that when they grow up, they can, you know, maybe deal with less identity issues, as opposed to, you know, we're just going to be together, we're going to have a baby, and the baby's going to be here, and we're not going to have these kind of questions. Because I've seen them a lot of times where I've got some of my friends who they may have, some of my Caucasian female friends who may have babies who have dark skin. And I'm like, all right, is this important to you though? That you are you having conversations? Are you looking into some of the deeper things within Black history that your child is going to deal with as they're growing up, so that they can know, and so that they can have some sense of pride, and so that we can kind of stave off some of this confusion that they have as they're growing up. And I think that you're right on the back end, colorism and the different things that you discussed in media representation is super important. But on the front end, I believe that we have the responsibility as a growing population who want to be interracially involved with each other, which I fully support. We have the responsibility to be aware of each other's culture. And if we're going to be with somebody of a different culture, that we make it a point that, okay, our child is going to know and understand.
I personally don't really have this much experience in it. And my stepbrothers, they are both biracial. They're all, I guess, Black and Caucasian. So I can try to see from their perspective. They were raised by their mother, who is Caucasian, and their dad was really part of their life. So they only been around their mother and seen what they've done, or what she has been around. So, you know, and she's Italian. So they've only been really, I can't say they've only been around Caucasian people, because they have a lot of Black friends. So they still be active in the Black community, and, you know, they believe in Black Lives Matter. So they see them like both ways, but I don't know how to explain this. I guess seeing it from their perspective, they understand the situation and what's going on, and it's good to see that, you know, just because they're biracial, they're not counting themselves out of this situation.
I liked what Sam said about, you know, interracial couples and having children, because it also kind of roots back to hair again. Like, if you want to have a child, if a white person and a black person want to come together and have a child, that's great. But again, you don't know what that child's going to look like. Nothing is guaranteed when you're mixing two different kinds of races. You don't know what their hair is going to come out to look like. Are they going to be light skin? Are they going to be dark skin? Are they going to have freckles, brown eyes, green eyes? Like, you don't know. And I think you need to be willing to make those changes to adapt to the culture of your child. You need to learn how to do their hair. You need to learn how to let them appreciate what they look like. I have a friend who lives in Texas, and she's biracial. Her mom is white. And she has very kinky hair. She has very dark brown eyes, dark brown hair, dark skin. And her dad has never stepped in to intervene. Not that it's kind of his job, but her mom, her whole life, has tried to convince her, you should straighten your hair all the time, or you should get it chemically straightened. You should get colored contacts. She wears glasses. Like, you should get colored contacts, or do you want to go and we can go like get like facials and stuff to make her freckles more apparent. Just things like that are just so toxic to a child growing up. And I was talking to her about it recently, knowing that this interview was coming up. And I said, do you think that took a toll on you? And she said, yes. And she's learned as an adult, she's in her 20s now, she's learned as an adult to not take what her mom says. She doesn't take it as an offense. She's trying to keep a relationship with her mom, but she said growing up that was very difficult, that she didn't know who she needed to be because her mom was convincing her she needed to be the exact opposite of what she actually was and inherently was. And that made just growing up and making choices very difficult for her. And that's something that I'm sure happens everywhere when you grow up and you have a bunch of different, like, you're a very diverse child, and it's up to your parents to raise you knowing what your culture is.
You can't just straighten a black person's hair or your black child's hair just because it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So I think that's a great example. I have a good friend of mine who she grew up straightening her hair almost every single day because it was too hard for her to deal with when it was curly, and she didn't know how to take care of it. She also is biracial. She had a white mother who predominantly raised her, and her mother didn't know what to do either. And so I think everything Sam said is huge. It's huge.
You know, we're talking about biracial and, you know, the movement of Black Lives Matter. I know I've seen, or I've read, or people have their ideas of who's authentic in I guess the movement, right? Do you feel that, you know, being biracial, or, you know, a black man married to a white woman, does that discount or enhance their voice in the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think that has to deal with where people kind of see it. Do people see the Black Lives Matter movement? And it's individual, right? Do people see the Black Lives Matter movement as something that's to benefit Black society, or is the Black Lives Matter movement something to benefit all of us? And I think that when you begin to look at whether if you have a black guy who's with a white girl or vice versa, and that they're discredited or they're discounted because they're in that, then you can tell that kind of person is speaking from the perspective that, okay, this is just Black people. But that kind of perspective isn't going to bring everybody in, and isn't going to get everybody on board with us being able to make this something that's accepted and us being together nationwide. So you're dealing with two different perspectives there. I think that when you hear that, you're hearing a lot of the pain and the hurt from years of systemic racism, right, coming out, that, oh, you know, how could you go be with somebody who's not like us, or somebody who's not the enemy, who's the enemy, and because you do that, you're discredited, as opposed to, yeah, let's open this thing up and let's get, like you were saying, Jay, the Black Americans who are trans, and let's get all these different people involved here so that this can be something that benefits all of us as a whole, as opposed to something that just benefits a particular group of people. It's just that traditional question of, should we be integrating or should we be segregated? And, you know, I think at this point, I mean, at least I look at it personally, we should be looking towards integrating further. I think that's the only way that we're going to, you know, find a happy medium here.
Is this for Black people, or is this for all of us? And if we understand it as what it truly is and should be, as being for all of us, and again, this brings up the intersectionality aspect, this is really for all of us. So it shouldn't discount anything. I think if, kind of like what you were saying, Sam, it opens that door for so much opportunity for education and conversation, and really getting in there and deeply, deeply having people understand and changing the way that they think and how they communicate and how they then go out into the world and express those maybe newfound ideas that they have.
If we say it's just for Black people, and I get people who have that kind of opinion too, but if we say that it's just something for Black people and we just want it to be something that's Black centered, then we're letting other people off of the hook, right? We're not creating that accountability and responsibility that we also have. We're saying that it's hard to ask for everybody to jump in and to be a part and to want help if we're just saying that this is something that's exclusively Black.
A lot to say here, but are you listening? Next, we'll take a look at police and what started this movement.